quick poll. Raise your hand if at any part in your life you've been afraid of the dark. I'm sure everyone's been afraid of the dark at some point. Whether you were small or even now, I will admit I still keep a nightlight on in my room. So today we're going to focus on the plague of darkness, and I'm going to share my screen. So can you imagine this for a moment? Then the Lord said to Moses, "Hold out your arm toward the sky, that there may be darkness upon the land of Egypt, a darkness that can be touched." Can you imagine how terrifying that would be? I remember in my childhood when the lights went out at night, that was enough I was done. That was really rough. I needed a flashlight. But the Egyptians, they had a darkness that could be touched. So many of our wonderful classic commentators, can I make it bigger? Yes, I can make it bigger. Is that better? Can everyone see the text? Great. So many of our commentators talk about what this darkness must have been like for the Egyptians. One of our commentators of Arbanel asked the questions, what is the meaning of a darkness that can be touched? And the second question was, why did the Egyptians not simply light lamps? It seems pretty easy, right? I mean, when the lights went out for me, I would just I get a flashlight or use my phone. But that didn't work for the Egyptians. So what is a darkness that can be touched? What do you think? You can share it in the chat. Yell it out. What kind of darkness is that? Something that paralyzes you. Yes, that's a great thought. I mean, terrifying thought.
Unexpected, overwhelming.
Overwhelming.
Some scientists can look at it as a volcanic eruption that lasted for several days and it blacked out everything.
Wow. That's an interesting thought. Although something to also think about is the Israelites were able to see, they weren't the Israelites yet, but the Hebrews were able to see, they were able to light lamps. They could see in the darkness. So only the Egyptians were affected by this. Ooh, an internal darkness.
Did the Egyptians know the Hebrews could see?
Well, no, because they couldn't see.
Yeah, so
They had there was no light. It wasn't even a glimmer. So Rashi describes this darkness as a darkness that can be touched, as a darkness more dark than the dark of night. The dark of night grew darker still. The Midrash takes this verb to be from to grope. You shall grope at noon as a blind man gropes in the dark, indicating that the darkness was so thick it was doubled and redoubled until it became a darkness of substance. You could feel it. You could feel it in your hands. Was it blindness? Well, in a way, it's blindness because they could not see. The Egyptians could not see through this darkness. So Ibn Ezra, another great commentator of ours, he describes this darkness as the sense is that there would be a fog so thick that Egypt could feel it. So again, you can feel this darkness. It's palpable, tangible. Perhaps a darkness that is also very cold, so cold you can feel it with your hands. Yes. So this darkness is clearly something that is terrifying. Right? This is not the kind of darkness you want to be stuck in. Ramban says the darkness was not merely the absence of sunlight, so that the sun set and it was as dark as night, but it was a thick darkness, that is a dense fog that descended from the sky. This darkness extinguished every light, just as in deep mines and other places of intense darkness, no light can exist. It was not merely that daylight was absent, but darkness was sent. And again, he mentions this fog, but this idea of a place where no light can exist. Ramban's commentary really, really strikes me and really makes me feel for all the Egyptians out who experienced this. Maybe not the ones who caused the suffering, but the others. Right? It was a general darkness for all Egyptians. An absence of sunlight. Can you imagine that? Yeah, it's terrifying because they can smell fear and hear cries, right? So it's only your sight that is gone, right? You can still hear each other. Gersonides cites Genesis Rabbah, which tells us this was an unnatural cloud, in a way that it was sort of like a gas, right? They had to stop up their mouths and their nostrils to make sure they didn't breathe it in, because breathing in this darkness could be fatal. And I'm going to skip down to our more mystical commentators. Hidushei Harim. There is no greater darkness than one in which a man did not see his fellow, in which a person becomes oblivious to the needs of his fellow man. When that happens, a person becomes stymied in his personal development as well. So now this darkness has to do with humanity, right? It has to do with every individual person. And this struck me for where we are in our history currently. There's some light shining in, but there has been some darkness that we felt over this time, right? Over this recent time. So I'm going to sort of read it again. There is no greater darkness than one in which a man did not see his fellow, in which a person becomes oblivious to the needs of his fellow man. So it's so important, right, to keep us from this darkness. It's so important that we are always aware of each other. And then last but not least, Or Hameir. Great darkness in the land of Egypt. Where awareness is lacking, there is great darkness. You then fall into the narrow places. But scripture then tells us what this darkness is. People did not see their brothers. See means they didn't consider them. They didn't take to heart how much they could learn from the goodness of the people around them. On the contrary, they kept finding faults and lack in others, glorifying their own deeds. This led them to walk about in darkness and to see no light. So darkness can affect us in many ways, and it affected the Egyptians in many ways. Right? Light can be joy, right? Our mystical commentators speak in metaphors, while our more classic commentators really speak of the tangibility, the tangibleness of this darkness that overwhelmed. So as we continue into the week ahead, let us be the light, right? Let us be the light. Think of the Hebrews who held their lamps and were able to see in the darkness while the Egyptians couldn't, and see if we can light the way of others.